Welcome everyone to the webinar. In this webinar, we're going to discuss how to improve your comprehension and retention while reading news articles. Now, in the previous webinar, we discussed how to read informational material. We talked about the multiple reading process as a way to get better comprehension and retention. However, we all know that not all informational material is the same, and I want you to know that news articles have a very specific structure that they go by. So it's important for you to know this so you can get better comprehension and retention and also be able to go through them faster. So news articles are structured in what's known as an inverted triangle. All that means is that the most important information is at the top. So what I want you to know about this is that the way that you should approach the material when you have a news article, the first paragraph is where you're going to get, usually the first few paragraphs are going to give you the most of the information. So we could still do this multiple reading process, but we would do it a little differently. Remember how I said in the multiple reading process with informational material, usually you read your introduction and conclusion to the material, but I wouldn't recommend doing that in a news article. Why would that be? Because the conclusion is going to have some very specific information that is not, it's not the most important information in the article. The most important information is at the top. So the who, the what, the where, the when, the how, that all of that information is going to be at the top of the news article. So the preview would be just reading the first paragraph. Your overview would be reading the next 2 to 3 paragraphs. So why do we do this? Because the overview usually would be reading headings and subheadings. Most news articles don't have headings and subheadings. The other way to do an overview is to read the first sentence of every paragraph. But in a news article, a lot of the paragraphs are simply 1 or 2 sentences long, so it wouldn't make sense to read the first sentence of every paragraph, especially when the information is becoming less and less important. So you can think of the preview and overview kind of like one step. It's really just read the first 2 or 3 paragraphs and then decide whether or not you want to read the entire article. If you do want to read the entire article, that's where you read the whole article, and that's when I would actually copy and paste the material into the Accelerator application. So remember how we said a lot of news articles tend to be very short paragraphs with only 1 or 2, maybe 3 sentences max per paragraph. I mean, if we look at, let me take you over to the other browser here. Here's an example of a very short article from The Onion. Area dad reading entire newspaper article out loud for some reason. Now, there isn't really any other content beyond that. It's just a headline. Now, there are other articles that are a little longer than just the headline. So here's another one here. Area eccentric reads entire book. Now, remember how we said we would start with just reading the first few paragraphs? That's where we would read, these first few paragraphs. Notice how they're very short. This paragraph only has how many sentences? Here's one. Here's another, only 2 sentences. Next paragraph only has 1 sentence. The next paragraph over here only seems to have 2 sentences. So we would start off and we'd read this part. And I wouldn't even bother copying and pasting these first few paragraphs into Accelerator. I would just read them normally by eyeballing it on the screen. And then if I decided I wanted to read the entire thing, then I would copy and paste the entire article, which you can see is a little longer. But as you can see here, the article says, Area eccentric reads entire book. The first paragraph says, sitting in a quiet downtown diner, local hospital administrator Philip Meyer looks as normal and well-adjusted as can be, yet there's more to this 27-year-old than meets the eye. Meyer has recently finished reading a book. Yes, the whole thing. So by the first 2 paragraphs, we know what this is about. Obviously, if you're familiar with The Onion, it's a satirical newspaper with funny news. It was great, he said. Peculiar Indiana native who, despite owning a television and having an active social life, read every single page to Kill a Mockingbird by Harper Lee, especially the way things came together for the scout in the end. Very good. Now, by this point, we've got most of the article. If we want to continue reading, we're going to get less and less important information. As we said, this is how articles tend to be structured. So, again, just to summarize, we're previewing, we're reading the first few paragraphs and overviewing, and then we just decide whether or not to read the whole article. I really want you to get an idea. I know I'm kind of joking around here showing you news articles that aren't real news articles, but the idea here is that all these news articles are written in exactly the same way. That does not include, however, op-ed pieces, so opinion pieces that you sometimes find in the middle of the newspaper, those have a little bit more structure where the first sentence tends to be the main idea and so on, intros and conclusions. And you could still use the multiple reading process on that, but you would use it the other way that we mentioned in the previous video. But if you have news articles about, let's say, a crime that happened in the neighborhood, or some other news article that's discussing maybe politics or what else is going on in the world, you want to make sure that you're aware that it's going to be structured in this inverted triangle. So read the first few paragraphs. I usually read maybe 2 or 3 paragraphs, and then I just decide, do I want to read it? If the answer is yes, I copy and paste the rest of the paragraphs into Accelerator, and I go at a very fast pace because I know the information is getting less important, and I already know generally what it's going to be about. So make sure you use this process on an inverted triangle whenever you have news articles.